entertainmentbuilder.com.
Hey now everyone, and welcome back to a brand new and special, that's right, we like to do things special over here, of the blue light variety. We're breaking out Thrones Time. That's because we've gotten some relevant news to discuss. I mean, the last time we talked, it was Nick, Keith, and myself, and we just kind of talked about what the hell are we going to talk about for the next 2 years, because the show is taking super long to develop. It's actually finished principal photography at this point, but we're still not going to get it until sometime in 2019. I think we do have a concrete date, but I can't think of it right now. But anyways, last week during E3, we got some official news out of HBO about Game of Thrones, just not the Game of Thrones we've all been following since 2010. The Game of Thrones we speak of is going to be a new prequel that has been greenlit by HBO that's going to deal with, Martin's universe, A Song of Ice and Fire, 10,000 years prior to the events we've been watching in Game of Thrones proper. So Nick's the one that clued me into it, and he's joining me tonight on Thrones Time. So, dude, I mean, what's your initial reaction to this? Are you excited, or are you more like, well, why couldn't we just have Season 8 this year? Or are you like, hey, Martin, why don't you just finish the fucking books instead of all these other projects? Now that you're famous, you can't finish what you started. I mean, what was your initial thought?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super surprised that they, finally have picked a sequel. News came out, I guess it was maybe a year, 6 months ago, something like that HBO was looking for a sequel, up to potentially 5 prequels or spin-offs, so to speak. So they finally have one. Like you said, it's not the news that we were hoping for as far as whether it's Martin's book or, more information about the final season of the show. So I'm so wrapped up in the current happenings of Westeros and Essos that I'm not overly concerned about what happened 10,000 years ago at this point. So it struck me as kind of like that sounds kind of cool. I'll probably watch it. I'm not super psyched on it right now, probably because I'm, more excited for the final season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I can't get excited about this yet. I have a feeling a year, 2 years from now, whenever this comes out, I mean, it just says HBO's announced the pilot, which means, they're probably going to fork out some money to at least shoot one hour long, 1 hour long episode to see how it turns out. But as Nick said, I just want the conclusion of Game of Thrones proper. I've been wanting this since I finished book 5. Yes, I am a book reader. I started out with the show, watched, I think, a season or two, and then I was like, you know what, I got to get into these books, and then just blew through them because, as they say, the books truly are better than the moving pictures HBO has given us. Not to say that HBO's project has been terrible by any means. It's been fantastic. It's been everything, really. I mean, it's probably one of my favorite series HBO's ever put out. I mean, I'm glad Westworld is at least around to fill its void this summer. But I want to know what's going to happen with the main players we've been following for 8 years now. I don't really care at this point about characters that have been briefly mentioned in, Meister Scrolls, this, that, and the other thing in the Song of Ice and Fire series. But I know when it comes down to it, Nick, I'm a lore junkie of any geeky fantasy sci-fi franchise I get into. I mean, I eat this shit up. I eat it up in video games, movies, comic books. If you can give me stuff that's going to help flesh out the world even more and expand upon characters we only heard about in passing, I'm all for it. But I'm not going to be popping little boners at this point talking about a prequel when we still haven't seen the conclusion of Martin's original Westeros tale.
Yeah, definitely. And just because, as you mentioned, this is HBO's greatest, biggest show to date, it might be the greatest and biggest in TV history to date, but the fact that everyone is so invested, the fans are so invested in the current show, it's hard to get excited about something else. Even though it does have to do with the Game of Thrones universe, as you said, the characters that are going to be in this prequel most likely are ones that have come across in the scrolls or Old Nan's tales, and that's basically it. We haven't really done a whole lot in the current Game of Thrones to really dig into what happened 10,000 years before, other than, I think Bran the Builder is probably the most mentioned name.
Totally. Azor Ahai, I mean, we've
here.
heard obviously that. They're talking about being set during the Age of Heroes. My deep Game of Thrones knowledge isn't that vast. I mean, sure, it sounds great. And we get a lot more of the history told in the book versions. There's no doubt about that. So if you have read the book, I imagine book readers are probably more excited about this prequel and what it could flesh out in terms of world building for Game of Thrones than just the show fans. Because, as Nick just said, the show has casually thrown out the big stuff, which probably means that it's very important to this show's narrative. Where the book, obviously books, you can go on all sorts of tangents. I mean, even if you've read up through book 5, you already know that the show has wildly veered from the various plots that Martin had cooking in the books, which is, before we came online, Nick and I were talking about like how big of a bummer it is still that this guy, all due to HBO, I mean, let's be honest, I do think he would be done with the books at this point in time if his creation that he started way back in 1996 didn't freaking blow up worldwide in 2010. I mean, this is a guy, and I'm not going to say I blame him. I mean, I think anyone that puts themselves out there creatively eventually wants to be recognized and sometimes adored for their work, and he's been eating it up for the past 8 years. So much so that he's not done with book 6 yet, which means book 7's probably at least another 10 years away. Go ahead and laugh. I'm not fucking kidding. You know I'm right. I mean, what is it now, Nick? Book 6 was supposed to be out, 2011?
Yeah,
I think was the initial
2012, something like that. Yeah,
publisher date,
and then it was going to be 2014, then 2016, and now we're halfway through 2018. I think he's put out one, maybe 2 chapters. A couple of years ago, he put out a chapter or 2. Yeah.
And who wants to read that? I mean, who wants to read a chapter of a book? Because, I mean, that's like the ultimate tease. And because it's a book especially, that you're not going to get a payoff for years to come. I mean, he's already said, no shot in hell book 6 2018, which means probably no shot in hell in 2019. I 100% at this point believe this guy will die before the books are finished being written.
Yeah, and that's going to be a shame too, because there's obviously fans that have been fans of the book series since '96, the early 2000s, before the show became what it is today. So they of all people deserve the book payoff and getting that feeling of completion as well. But yeah, the way things have been going, he's taken longer and longer between books as they've gone on, and obviously. When was book 5 written? Do you remember when that was
I don't
finished?
Even remember.
2006 or 7ish maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 5 years from then was when he was supposed to have book 6, we're 7 years past that now. So, we're looking at 12, 13 years.
I mean, he's always been slow, but he's hit an Arctic glacial type of pace at this point in time. I mean, it's just because, like I said, he's got his hands in so many cookie jars now. I mean, Nick brought up the fact that this fall, he's releasing the History of the Targaryens book. I think last year he kind of released like a Tolkien-like encyclopedia for all of Westeros, which are big projects, but projects that are taken away from the bread and butter that allowed him to make these damn projects. It's like, come on, I'm not even a big reading is fundamental guy. I actually hate reading. I mean, if I can watch something, I'm going to watch it versus reading. But this is one franchise that 100% the book is better. I mean, it's not even on the same level in terms of the intricacies of the narratives he was weaving, the way he would tell the story from certain people's points of views for each chapter. I mean, it was so much more rich and deep than what we're getting in the shows. And again, the shows are fantastic. They've done what they can with a 7-book series where some of the books are 500 plus pages. But damn, man. He's good at writing. He just is very sucky at forcing himself to stick to deadlines. And you gotta wonder, like, what the fuck type of deal does he have with his publisher?
Yeah,
I mean, because
I think he holds the cards there now with all the popularity. I think he basically can do whatever.
oh, he has to, because I mean,
Yeah,
he's already
yeah.
blown past multiple like ship dates. I mean, he
Yeah.
even said, "Well, I missed another date that the publisher wanted me to hit." Ha ha ha! It's like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. Yeah, I like to joke around with my friends and when we're talking about it and say, think of all the things that he's could potentially be doing besides writing the book. And when I go to the local grocery store I go to behind the deli counter, there's a guy back there that looks just like George R.R. Martin with a slightly more trimmed beard. And I joke with my friends, I'm like, oh, he's not writing the book 'cause he's busy cutting deli meat at the grocery store.
He's slinging some cheese slices. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a little frustrating. As we said offline, what bothers me the most is that now the show's version of the narrative is becoming the version of the narrative. So even if the books do get finished and we go back, they're not going to have the same magical air to them, the same mystery, the same, ooh, what's going to happen? Because ultimately, while the show hasn't hit every little detail that the book has told, it still has managed to massage the main story points and relate them to TV watchers only. So we are going to get his ultimate end game. It's just going to be a very watered down version, which is therefore going to make the book version less exciting. All the tension's going to be gone. And it's going to be a huge bummer. I mean, I will never forget the moment I read the Red Wedding chapter, and this was before it came out in the series, so I had no clue what was happening. And with each page flip, my heartbeat would increase, and I'd be like, "Oh man, what the hell? Oh, come on, Rob, don't make that choice. Oh man, come on, you're just getting yourself in trouble." And then it's like, "Oh shit, here we go." And I mean, it affected me, like that whole chapter and what happened and what the phrase did to the Starks there. I was like, "Man, that's fucked up." I mean, it affected me to where I couldn't even fall asleep right away because I typically read at night, and we're gonna miss out on all that with arguably probably some of the biggest twists and turns that he has ever written for this franchise.
Well, I mean, you even go back to just this recent season and think of all the craziness that happens.
Yeah,
like, can you imagine
Christ.
reading that, like you said, flipping page as it, the fight with the wildlings, the death of Viserion, right? That was the dragon.
That was the one that stuck out to me.
Him coming back and burning down the wall. Like, imagine reading. I mean, seeing it was really cool. Don't get me wrong, but reading it when you have in that moment when your imagination's going.
Well, think about
is huge.
The slow boil reveal of Jon Targaryen.
Yeah.
Or Rhaegar. I mean, come on. It's like, what the hell? So that is a bummer. I mean, this isn't just to pick on George Cast. We are going to get back to the main topic, which is the prequel era show coming to Game of Thrones, coming to HBO. Probably. What do you think, Nick? Is that going to be 2020? They're going to wait?
Well, they said, so obviously final season's 2019. Their HBO's plan, I believe, is to start the prequel the following year. So I believe 2020 would be. So they run the pilots, assuming they pick it up and actually go through with it, which they probably will. 2020 would be when that season would likely drop.
Yeah, so I guess what we can kind of move into, we do know it's going to be set upwards of 10,000 years prior to the events of what we've seen in the current show. There are no written stories from Martin during this time frame. There are documented instances of heroic acts and things that have happened during this time frame. So I do think there's going to be some interesting things. And like I said, I'm all about lore. And I would love to see some of the things that people already speculate on what we could see during this timeline. So I'll just kind of throw out a few that the Ringer had up here. We had the construction of the wall, the origin of Azor Ahai, the founding of the Night's Watch. I mean, that type of shit. I mean, couldn't we argue we could see, we've already seen it, but we could see the battle of the children and the First Men, and we could see the creation of the Night King and his first reign of terror and why the wall maybe it was built back then. So I think there's definitely some good content that they could cook up for this time setting they want to run this prequel in.
Yeah, definitely. And the fact that it is so far back and we don't really have any background on any of these characters allows HBO and Martin and Jane Goldman, who helped write the pilot, to really develop the characters however they want. So they don't have to really stick to anything quite like they did with the Game of Thrones book, like with Jon Snow and Arya and everybody. So they can really kind of expand on that and really create still use Martin's universe, but create their own characters for it. So yeah, I mean, you had mentioned the Children of the Forest and the First Men and the Wall. That's all stuff that is definitely interesting. So like once the show is on and I'm watching it, I'm going to be tuned into that sort of thing. So it's got the Long Night in there, and that's when, if you recall from the Game of Thrones and from the Old Nan's Tales and all that stuff, the Long Night is basically when the Night King and his army basically overruled Westeros before the wall was built. And then that's what, once they were defeated and pushed back to the north, that's when Bran the Builder decided, you know what, we should probably build something. So they build that giant ice wall, magic to keep the Night King and everything out. So that sort of time frame and seeing Westeros in a different period would be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, I guess we've also got in the press release, HBO kind of threw some shit out there to get people thinking, and they used the phrase Starks of Legend. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are kind of latching on to, well, could that mean Brandon the Builder? And if you just kind of read into this article Nick linked me, Brandon the Builder may be kind of like one of our biblical characters where they're not really real. It could be an amalgamation of a bunch of different Starks, or we really could see this magical guy, because as I think we've even heard in the last 2 seasons, Westeros used to be a very magical place until, as most places are, the white man showed up and fucking razed it and killed everybody and stole people's lands and basically did what the Europeans did to the Indians. So there could be some magic and a lot more fantasy stuff going on during this time setting.
Yeah, and that would be cool to see too, because we get glimpses of that with Melisandre and I'm forgetting the name of the other Red Priestess that was talking with Dany and Tyrion in the later episodes. But we see magic in that sense there, and obviously dragons and breathing fire and that
people
sort of
coming
thing.
back to life. I mean, we got
Yeah.
to see what the children can do. I mean, they can essentially throw fireballs out of their hands, and they can shove dragon glass in the men's chests and turn them into Night Kings. So it's definitely, magic would be flowing back then. It would almost be, I'd say, a little bit more like a King Arthur period, where magic is very in the forefront of everyone's lives. It's not just taboo shit, or we never really know if this stuff happened. I mean, even in this version of Westeros we've been watching, Game of Thrones, magic is an anomaly. Like, people don't really believe if it's real or not. And I think even viewers and readers may have questioned until we actually saw Melisandre's charms to change her look from a very old haggard lady to a sexy ass woman. So
and the Shadow Assassin.
Yeah, I mean, we do know magic exists. It's just been kind of snuffed out by most factions at this point in time. So clearly 10,000 years in the past, I mean, we could see a ton of that. So maybe there is a Brandon the Builder that is kind of a giant that can just do this shit with the snap of the fingers. Because, according to lore that's out there and it's been talked about in legends that have been relayed to the Stark kids, I mean, Brandon the Builder, he supposedly built the wall, he raised Winterfell, Storm's End, the High Tower at Old Town. Basically anything big built in the north, he did it. And he probably wasn't doing it with an army. He was probably using a little bit of magic. Or, as we've speculated in the past on Thrones Time, it could be fucking Brandon Stark himself doing some shit. So you just don't know. Who knows if they'll go that way. But there's other characters that have been talked about but could be fleshed out. And guess what? They're from other famous families. So the other one in this article, Nick, is Lan the Cleaver. I love that name. I guess I've never heard of the founder of House Lannister. But they're saying he's basically the original Tyrion.
Yeah. So the story with him goes is he basically scammed his way into owning Casterly Rock, which we know from current Game of Thrones is the home of the Lannister clan. So the story goes that he snuck his way in one night through some holes, some cracks in the rock, and basically kind of like Tyrion did with the sewer into Casterly Rock when, you know, they were trying to take it last season. But basically snuck his way in, whispered into the ears of the Casterly family members that were sitting there, put, you know, thoughts in their head about how one brother is turning against another brother, and basically started this inter-family fight. He also married, I believe if I remember correctly, he married into it and convinced the Castlys basically to help, you know, through his trickery, help him become the owner or the namesake of Casterly Rock there. So from that point on, it became the Lannister home ground for, you know, the evil empire that we know and love today.
And honestly, I would love for a lot of this speculation to come true, because that's what I'd want in this prequel. I mean, yeah, I want to meet new characters and this, that, and the other thing, but I would love to see the roots of these famous houses that we've come to know, love, and hate through 7 seasons at this point watching the show. To me, prequels are dangerous because of what the Star Wars prequels did to my love of Star Wars. So prequels can damage your love of a fake science fiction show or a fake fantasy show.
But even too, if you look at TV and spin-offs in general, how many television spin-offs have been successful?
Right.
Because you look at a show like Friends. They had the spin-off with Joey, didn't work. Seinfeld had a spin-off of Michael Richards, basically, that didn't work. You know, the one I watch now that is actually kind of working is Better Call Saul, you know, spin-off of Breaking Bad.
Yeah, speaking of which, where the hell did season 3 go?
It got pushed back. I forget exactly when that's coming out, but usually it is out in the spring.
I didn't think they would cancel that show because it's pretty fucking great.
I forget. There's something occurred where they had to push production back or push the debut back, but I believe at some point later this year it'll be out. But anyway, yeah, you just look at spin-offs and prequels in general in the television world, and rarely do they last more than a couple seasons. So, and HBO, off the top of my head, can't think of any prequel or sequel that they've done. So in my mind, this is something completely new for them. You know, kind of a new era.
I trust them though. I don't.
Well, right.
I don't think they'll fuck this up because, again, I hate to loop Star Wars in because I know it's Nick's favorite thing, but that was a whole different beast because George had complete control over everything. Like, no one got a word in with that guy. And I love him to death. I mean, he's the maker. Without him, we don't have any of this shit to fucking... some of you lunatics out there, you know, fucking remake The Last Jedi, dummies, and all the hate.
I was going to ask if you saw that.
Oh, dude, it's just...
I'll leave that for you and the other Nick to talk about.
I put out a tweet on the EB account just like, can all you big sites and celebs stop fucking retweeting this bullshit? Because all you're doing is legitimizing these assholes. Like, you're getting their rocks off. Like, this is what they want.
Yeah.
Even though everyone's making fun of this guy, he's still, I guarantee he's sitting there like, ha, 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 ha,
right.
I'm awesome, blah, blah, look who retweeted. Ryan Johnson even replied to it. It's like, come on, guys. Be above that nonsense. But anyways, back to Game of Thrones. Prequels can be dangerous, but I have no doubt this one's going to be good. And again, going back to the Star Wars thing, it's because one man had all the control and no one had balls to say, hey, man, I don't think that's a great idea. And that's why those prequels are pretty freaking terrible. And to this day, after seeing what's gone on since The Last Jedi, I wish we had social media back when the prequels came out. Because I guarantee you, people would be acting the same way, if not more insane, with a lot more credibility behind it, because I'm not just some asshole that's going to say those movies sucked. I can bullet point and give you a fucking detailed outline of why those movies are terrible and how they ruined certain characters like Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, so on and so forth. So I'm not just sitting here...
And Hayden Christensen's career.
Right. I'm just not sitting here being a troll and just trying to get a reaction. I truly have fundamental story issues with those films. So if you ever want to come at me, let's do it. I could write a report for you. All right.
I hope someday you can get through a non-Star Wars podcast without talking about Star Wars, but I'm not holding my breath.
I can't help it, man. It infects every part of my life. I've got fucking dolls all over my desk, Star Wars style. But anyway, so back to some of these characters. Like, some of these guys, they seem kind of useless. Although Garth the Gardener, I'd like to see him because the backstory here is he's the guy that first essentially settled Highgarden. So again, it goes back to I want to see. I know it's cheap, but I want to see kind of the roots being planted for the famous families that we have come to know.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's another character we're talking here. Possibly is the Grey King,
of course.
Which the name alone sounds cool enough for me to have some interest in. So basically,
I mean, they're the Greyjoys, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's the king of the Iron Islands, so to speak, and supposedly he had a crown made of dragon teeth, and lived in a castle of dragon bone, and lived for over 1,000 years. So that's somebody I want to see on television. I mean, even that's somebody I want to learn about.
Just listen to this paragraph, people. Just kind of wrap your head around what we could see. I mean, honestly, this prequel, if they do it the way some of this lore has been written, it could feel almost like a comic book movie in terms of the special effects and shit. So, talking about the Grey King, he brought fire to Westeros by playing chicken with the Storm God. Okay? So, again, we're talking like ancient Ares, Zeus type of shit we would see. So he plays chicken with the Storm God, and by the way, he invents sailing, creates the first longship. Created the first longship out of a demon tree that ate humans. Boom.
Let's see that tree.
Yeah, sign me up. He also killed a dragon and sired 100 sons. So this is my kind of guy.
Yeah,
I mean, he sounds like a Greyjoy, doesn't he?
Yeah, he sounds like what.
Oh, he married a mermaid too.
Yeah, he sounds like that's who Euron Greyjoy is striving to be in the current Game of Thrones.
Wow, I like that guy. Who else we got here? Any other good ones here that you think kind of have a tie to? Well, I see one that's very obvious, and I do hope. Isn't it Simeon Star Eyes? I don't know.
He sounds interesting because supposedly he's blind. So the legend goes is he got these star sapphires, placed them into his empty eye sockets, and that's how he got the name. That sort of thing. Going back to the magic that we talked about earlier, you put some sapphires in Jon Snow's eyes. Is anything going to happen? Maybe. I don't know. If Melisandre's there, sure. But going back to 10,000 years to this day and age, doing something like that and then being able to see, or at least see well enough to fight or do whatever you need to do, that's where that force of magic comes in and becomes more prevalent in the story.
Yeah, so we also have Serwyn, the Mere Shield. There's a cool story behind him that Tyrion told. I mean, essentially, he killed the dragon Urax by using a Mere Shield, hence the name. But really, whoever wrote the article, they're kind of making good points. Like, even though we have the shells of these characters, they really could be turned into anybody in this show. I mean, they may not be called Serwyn, but you may get a character that does something similar. Just as Nick, introduced Simeon, you may not get Simeon Star Eyes, but you may get a character that has a very similar narrative behind him in terms of being blind. Here's one here, Grazdan the Great. I can see this possibly fitting in because this is the dude that founded Gis, which is essentially the predated city to Slaver's Bay. Again, that's just another locale that has been heavily featured in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, definitely. And then the next one on the list here, obviously we touched on him a bit, is obviously a huge player, and this is the Night King himself. As you mentioned earlier, we saw in season 6, I think it was, how the Children of the Forest turned basically created the Night King, the White Walker, so to speak, in a way to kind of be their army against the First Men. Because the First Men were coming in, the Children of the Forest were trying to battle them, but were losing. And then, they turn the switch. Here's the Night King. What happens then is, obviously, Children of the Forest lose control of the Night King and his army, and he goes off on his own. So that's that dissension between, master and soldier, so to speak, is something that I think would be a really important thing to see in the prequel.
I mean, let's be real. At this point, I like how this guy threw in the Olympic javelin throwing champion. He still is. I mean, that was a hell of a toss. I think we talked about that last season during our recap cast. Dude, he has to be in this prequel. And I'd say almost heavily has to be in it. We don't need to see how he is formed. That's already been shown to us. But, I mean, especially because they're teasing that it could be about the Long Night. I mean, the Night King is the one that brings about the Long Night. Mm-hmm. So I feel like this is a no-brainer. All the other guys we've been talking about, we could probably live without seeing him. I think Bran the Builder would be pretty sweet. But the Night King, to me, he just makes the most sense because that is a direct tie to this show we're currently watching. I mean, he is the only character that could fit in between these two time periods. I mean, yeah, you could make the argument that Bran could kind of, whatever his magic trick is called, transform himself back to that era. But the Night King is truly the only character that could exist in both time periods as a character that has unique stories in each time periods. Because what we're seeing now is essentially the second coming of what happened before with the Long Night. He's making his push again. He's rebuilt up his White Walkers. He's come to claim the land of men for a second time. So we would essentially be seeing the first time and hopefully him getting beaten back. To me, that's the most interesting stories this prequel could tell. The arrival of the men. Season 1 could be all about how it's so happy. We got all this magic shit here, the children. And then the men could show up, and then, their battle with the children. Then the children invent the Night King. He creates the White Walkers. They go off the rail. We have the Long Night. And then Azor Ahai comes in.
Yes.
And he is the one legend that essentially ends the Long Night, or allegedly ended the Long Night, or another time period that was like the Long Night, with this sword called the Lightbringer. So, I mean, just, spitball. Nick and I we're spitballing. We're pretending we're screenwriters here. I would like to see that. I mean, that's the stuff I want to see. I mean, I'm all about seeing brand new stuff. That's great. But in the end, it's going to have way more impact on super fans like us if these threads tie directly to the current show.
Yeah, and it's gotta feed those Easter egg hunts that the fans of the current show are going to be looking for. So you're definitely right there, and I think 100% Azor Ahai is in it. He's mentioned so many times. Is Jon Snow the reincarnate? Is it somebody else? Is it Jaime? Is it the Hounds maybe? Or whoever it is in the current show, is pure speculation. But they talk about it enough that it's worth visiting way back to see how he lived, basically, how he became the legend that we all know him as.
I mean, here's even just another quote from the press release. The world's descent from the golden age of heroes into its darkest hour. I mean, that's exactly what I just pitched.
Yeah.
Even season 1, a bulk of it is all, hey, this is great, Age of Heroes. Then men start to be men and start stealing everything for themselves, piss off the children. They do their thing, and then here we go. So the last kind of character they mentioned who could, the last hero, I mean, I thought I was having flashbacks and watching an old Arnold movie here. But apparently the last hero is truly the one that ended the Long Night. But as this article suggests, who the fuck is it? I mean, is it Azor Ahai? Is it the same person? Are they different? But apparently this last hero is the one that ultimately brought an end to the Long Night.
Yeah, and in this article that we have here from The Ringer, it talks about one of Old Nan's stories where he basically went in with an army. Everybody died. Even his horse, even his dog.
Yeah, shit's pretty dire at this point. He's basically going back to beg the children to help men again, is how I'm reading it.
Yeah. So it's crazy. I want to see him. I want to see whoever the last hero is. See them with his dead compatriots around him, with the army closing in, and see how he gets out of it. How does he survive? How does he end the war? How does he end the Long Night? So that's something that I feel like would absolutely be in there. And as you said, we don't know who that is. We know the legend. we know it could be Azor Ahai. It may very well be that because of his history and legend in himself.
You would think so, right? I mean, even with as much gusto Melisandre has talked about this guy, and really a lot of people, even more so in the book, I mean, he's Westeros' Jesus, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, gotta be. You're not going to have the last hero and then this guy, unless you want to talk about the whole God is Jesus and Jesus is God type of thing. Maybe something like that. But I don't. To me, I mean, some of the characters we talked about, it'd be neat to see them, especially Bran and you know the Lannister, and even you know the formation of Highgarden and that type of stuff. But I think that the real deal focus of the main plot has to be on what life was like prior to men, with men, the fallout, the Night King, and then the redemption.
And I mean, at some point too, you're going to have the formation, obviously, of the Wall, but then obviously of the Night's Watch. So
yeah, I mean that would be awesome.
You're
going to
see
too.
all those dilapidated castles in the current show. You're going to see them fresh and new.
Yeah, fresh, new, or hell, even being built. I mean,
yeah.
You may see a Winterfell that is hardly even formed at this point. You know, maybe they have a wall up, or maybe they only have the keep, but they don't have the full castle. So there's a lot of cool shit here. I mean, do you think this is something, if it's a good show, which I mean, I have no doubt it's going to be great. I mean, is this something they're going to do multiple seasons? Is this a one-off type of deal? Is this let's do a 10-episode run and see how it does, and then maybe cook up some more? Because I kind of think that's how they initially handled Westworld, was like, let's see how it goes, and you know, once it caught some steam, they're like, okay, yeah, the season 2 is good, and how this year season 2 aired one episode, they're like, okay, season 3's a go, let's do it. I feel like if successful, this could be a, what do you think, 3, 4, 5 season type of run show?
Yeah, definitely, and I think too it's going to depend on what other ideas they have come through the pipeline. So, you know, as we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, HBO was looking at potentially 4 or 5.
Yeah, that's true. So
spinoffs. So
they could be cannibalizing each other as well.
Right. So I mean, the one thing is, as nothing's fully confirmed yet, but the current showrunners for the Game of Thrones, I don't believe will be the showrunners for any of the prequels or the spinoffs. They have their other show on HBO that'll be coming out. I forget what it's called. Something with the Civil War, I believe. So
well, and shit, they have a fucking Star Wars trilogy.
Right.
So
yeah,
these guys,
they got their hands full.
They might. What do you think they're gonna get? Maybe get like some executive producer credits.
Yeah,
they're not
going to be
writing.
running
they're
the
not,
show
they're
like
not
they
the
have been the
showrunners.
last,
They're not writing
like
the
last
screen.
70 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of worries me a little bit, just because I don't know who it's going to be. You know, do they have good experience show running, or are they completely new and different? You know, I'm going to keep my mind open to it, obviously, but you get so used to how well the current show is done with its current showrunners and the directors they've used, that to put that trust into a completely different person, you know, might cause a little bit of concern, so to speak. But obviously, once it's released and we see it, you know, like you said, HBO, I trust them. You know, I think they make the right choices. They're very smart when it comes to their programming, and who they hire, who they bring in. They obviously have a lot of money that they throw at these sorts of things. So I think it could be a really successful spinoff.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it's gonna be very hard to fuck up. Like, I think they'd have to try to fuck this up.
I mean, if they include Jar Jar Binks in the prequel, then we might have to talk. But
there you go. I don't know. I mean, hell, people like Jar Jar Binks better than The Last Jedi. So what does that say about Star Wars fandom anymore? I mean, you just don't know with us psychos. Well, I mean, I think we've kind of covered the prequel thing. Trust me, there are some major spoilers out there, my friends. Major spoilers for Season 8. And it's been eating at me to avoid them, because I want to see them and I want to talk about them on another special episode of Thrones Time. But so far, Nick and I have remained vigilant and spoiler-free. I do feel like whatever's going to go down Season 8 is going to be so freaking special that I just can't allow myself to fuck it up. I can't do it.
Yeah, I'm the same way, and I did so well. I completely forgot that there were potential spoilers out there until you mentioned it just now. So
yeah, see, he's even better than me. Like he's got his blinders on. I do think about it because it goes back to my thing on I love knowing about lore and story, and I would love to get a little hint at what could be going on, so my brain could go crazy and do an hour speculation cast on what we're gonna see in season 8. But it's just. I think the twists and turns are going to be so epic that I want to go in as fresh as possible. I can't help myself with Star Wars spoilers. That's how I am. But this, I'm going to stick to my guns, at least for now.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you mentioned, I think, before we started recording that, the actresses that we were talking about with the potential spoilers.
Was her name Sophie Turner?
Yeah, Sophie Turner and Emilia Clarke. I read what she said. It's not so much spoiler as it kind of breeds speculation as to what happens with Dani and kind of how she turns out. But
even that, like there, like I don't even want to get in that territory.
Yeah. So that one I fell into. The Sophie Turner one I have stayed away from. But it's like you said, they've been with the show since the beginning. So for them to now do something that would potentially shed light on something their character did or will do, and the ending to the show, it seems highly unlikely. But
because I bet these people, the NDAs they sign, I bet the penalty is somewhat severe. I mean, it's not like you're going to go to jail, but it's like you could lose $1 million or something.
Yeah, I'd like to see an NDA for one of the Game of Thrones actors just to see what it looks like.
Yeah, on any big project, like even a Star Wars or a Lord of the Rings. I mean, what did they have to sign, or what would they lose if they actually did spoil something? Because clearly it's not much. Because Tom Holland from the MCU plays Spider-Man. That guy spoiled basically every movie he's been a part of, and he's only been doing it for 2 or 3 short years.
Well, but during the Avengers, when they were out doing their press junkets, there's like a YouTube video of him with Benedict Cumberbatch in multiple interviews where Cumberbatch has to cover his mouth.
Oh yeah, he's like, dude, what the fuck?
It's hilarious.
He's like, dude, he did it on Jimmy Kimmel. I mean, everyone looked at him like, bro, because he spoiled that Spider-Man goes out into space.
Oh right.
Yeah. He literally painted that whole scene. He's like, oh yeah, no he doesn't. It's like, fuck you, man.
I was just kidding.
So I guess it's not that hardcore, the MCU. And then you also had Mark Ruffalo streamed like the first part of Thor Ragnarok during the premiere last year from his phone because he left Instagram on. So again, Marvel's a little more lax, even though they're a Disney company. You never know. So for now, the Thrones Time crew is going to shy away from spoilers, but if anything relevant comes up, or even when we start getting some concrete stuff, a trailer or some legitimate set picks, we're going to fire up the mics and start talking about that Song of Ice and Fire, because it does suck that we didn't get it. Luckily, Westworld has been pretty fantastic this season. If anyone's watching that, we got the finale coming up Sunday. Who knows when you'll be listening to this? It's probably going to be after the finale. But that show's been really good. I highly recommend it. It's one of those shows where it's probably even better when you watch it the second time to see how all the puzzle pieces were strategically set up, even though you're watching it going like, what the fuck's going on with all these timelines? So you never know. Maybe we'll do a Westworld time. But until then, Nick, you got anything else to share with the Thrones Time fan base now?
Nope. No, I think I'm just like everyone else, just ready for the final season and
biding our time,
losing hope that the next book will ever be written. So
you know it. Well, we'll definitely do an episode if we get any book news, but don't hold your breath. I think we're gonna get season 8 before we get book 6. I mean, I don't even have to say I think. I know we will get season 8 before we get book 6, but that's Martin's style. Let's just hope he stays alive. Maybe he should get on a diet. I don't know, but it does worry me. All right, my friends, until next time, when we talk all things A Song of Ice and Fire, may the Force be with you always.